Well, we're still alive. For now, anyways. It seems as though my small porthole to the outside world hasn't been discovered yet, and happily, the satellite connection of this laptop seems to be usable anywhere in town. The fact that people were able to see it is a blessing in and of itself. First off, I just wanted to thank everyone who tried to give Aubrey and me advice. We took a good amount of things you suggested to heart, and in a few cases, it actually ended up saving our lives. We couldn't move Mrs. Thatcher's body outside last night, and though I don't think I'm dealing with something that'll bring the dead back to life, I did pull her into a storage closet and lock the door from the outside, just to be safe. I didn't dare ask Aubrey to help. She looked as though she was going to throw up just at the sight of me dragging her away. I also grabbed a set of keys off the desk, and I'm keeping them to use the library as a fallback shelter if we need to. The idea that our own government could be responsible for this, though, it's almost too much for my mind to comprehend. How, in this day and age, could they get away with something like this? Wiping an entire town, small or not, off the map? I mean, I've heard about MK Ultra from my father, who used to teach history at the local high school. And it seems to make sense that the man on the radio called this RF Ultra. It might be related. But that was in the 1950s and 60s, over half a century ago. I don't know. I just can't think about that right now. Anyways, I should tell you what happened today. I didn't really get much sleep last night. Every couple of hours I'd hear what sounded like scratching on the front door of the library, and I'd lay on one of the break room's couches, my eyes wide open and staring at the ceiling, praying that whoever it was, they wouldn't find a way in. I heard 2 more people scream as well. It means that there are some sane people left, and hiding. Though how many more of them are left, I don't know. I woke Aubrey up as the sun began to rise over the town. For a moment, a peaceful look crossed her face as she looked up at me. Then it was ripped away as she fully woke up, remembering where we were and the hellish situation we were in. She sighed and put her head in my hands. I hoped to God it was nothing more than a nightmare I had, she said softly. I sat down beside her, pulling her into my arms and giving her a hug. I wish that it was too, I confessed. After we were both fully awake, we checked the library for food and supplies. In the gathering dark last night, we hadn't been able to scout out much, but thankfully there were a couple of vending machines in the entrance hall of the library. One of the keys on the ring unlocked them, and we were able to pull out some bottles of water and candy bars for breakfast. As we ate and the sun rose higher in the sky, we spoke about what to do. I gently broached the subject, as one of you had suggested, of us simply hiding out in the library for a few days to be safe, but she immediately shot it down. Eddie, I am not leaving my parents out there. She cut herself off, looking down at the ground before finishing. I need to know if they're okay or not. I sighed. As much as I knew it may be foolish, I too wanted to know if my parents were alive, dead, or worse. Okay, we'll go look, but we are not splitting up. We'll go check your house first, and then after, we'll head uphill to mine. I looked around. We can't get out there unarmed, though. We need something to defend ourselves. After a few minutes of searching, we found a paper cutter in the back office which, after unscrewing a bolt, gave us a very formidable weapon. Aubrey also found a silver letter opener, which she slid into the front pocket of her jeans. Now armed, and sliding the laptop I used into a carrying case and slinging it over my shoulder, the 2 of us moved to the barricaded front door, and as quietly as we could, pulled the benches away. I checked my watch. The time read just after 11. Almost 24 hours had passed since the entire insanity began, and yet it felt more like an eternity. You ready? I whispered. Aubrey nodded, and with a final deep breath, she reached up and slowly turned the brass doorknob. The sun streamed through the open doorway, blinding us for a moment. I blinked my eyes rapidly to get them to adjust. Aside from an overturned trash can across the street, it was not only deserted, but could easily have passed for any normal day. But that was a deadly deceptive appearance. Moving quickly, we stepped out onto the steps and locked the library doors behind us. Sliding the keys into my jacket pocket, I motioned for her to stay low and pointed across the street to where the alley continued. We'd have to traverse another 2 or 3 blocks before the road began to slope back up to the houses, condominiums, and at the very top, the bottom of the ski lifts. Sure that nobody was near us, we dashed for the alley. Slipping into the darkened shadows, we caught our breath for a second. Well, we've made it 50 feet out of the building without being swarmed or even spotted yet. I half hoped that the affected, which is what I'd begin to think of them, as in order to try and mentally detach myself in order not to break down, had ended up turning on each other when no more victims were easily reachable. Keeping that hope in mind, I led the way through the first alley. As we reached a T-junction, something dripped onto the back of my neck. Reaching my hand back, I pulled away to see my fingers had turned crimson. I froze, then swallowed hard, and looked up. The building the alley ran between had the hardware store and the flower shop to our left, and a storage warehouse on the right. We stood underneath stairs for the fire escape, which went up to the 3rd-story window, where someone lay, halfway out of it, face down on the metal landing. Good God. I couldn't tell who it was. They were too high above me, but I knew they were dead. I could see their eyes, staring wide open but unseeing through the grating. Aubrey, whatever you do, do not look up, I whispered. In any other situation, she would have given me some smart-ass remark about how she hadn't planned to in the first place. But she didn't. She just stared straight ahead and nodded. We continued on until we reached the end of the alley, where we'd need to cross another street to reach the next. The sound of smashing glass and clanging came from around the corner. My heart stopped, and my throat went dry as cotton. Shit. The sound of footsteps rapidly approached the alleyway, and I realized there were too many for us to take on, even armed. I felt Aubrey tug at my shoulder, and I turned to see her motioning to the space underneath a dumpster next to us. "Under there! Hide!" she hissed. I didn't dare hesitate. I dropped to my hands and knees and slid under the narrow and disgusting space, making sure to pull the paper cutter blade under with me. Aubrey rolled under and scooted next to me, not a moment too soon either. We couldn't see any more of them than their feet and legs from where we were, but I counted at least 10 or 15 of them, all walking in a group. They didn't speak a word to each other, though a few seemed to mumble incoherently from time to time. They passed by our hiding spot, thankfully not seeming to have taken any notice of us. One thing made me feel like I was going to vomit, however. One of them had been dragging something behind them. Or, should I say, someone. Someone I knew. It was Jeff Bailey, one of the star running backs for the high school football team. His arms skittered along the ground behind him, his class ring pinging off the asphalt from time to time. An arrow stuck out from his head. Someone had shot him with a bow. I felt a small tremor beside me, and turned my head to see Aubrey silently crying at the sight. Jeff had been a decent guy. We waited for a few minutes to make sure they wouldn't come back, as well as Aubrey to compose herself, then scooted out from our hiding spot. Brushing off the dirt and debris stuck to my jacket and pants, I cautiously approached the alley entrance. I didn't see hide or hair of the passing group. They must have turned onto the main road. I jerked my head to signal to Aubrey to follow me. Together, we silently ran across the street. There was only a single block left before the houses began. We made our way past the back entrances to the bakery and post office. That was when I froze, seeing the symbol on the half-open back door to my right. The sheriff's department. I knew we needed to keep moving, Waiting too long out in the open, even in the alley, was a chance we could be spotted, but the idea of being able to get a gun was appealing. After all, the blade and letter opener may help us against one or two of the affected, but if we were spotted by a group like the one we saw a minute ago, we were screwed and tattooed. My decision was made. Motioning for Aubrey to come over, I slowly pulled the half-open door back, looking inside. The back room was covered in shadows, making it hard to see anything. "Eddie, what are you doing?" I heard Aubrey whisper behind me. I put a finger to my lips, and she mercifully fell silent again. There didn't appear to be anyone in the room. Beckoning to her, I slid inside. After a hesitant moment, she followed. We found ourselves inside the records room. Tall filing cabinets rose up on either side of us, leading to a single door on the left which led out to the main office. At the other end of the room was a door. The white lettering read, "Armory. Keep locked at all times." Moving quickly towards it, I tried the handle. It wouldn't budge at all. I swore under my breath. Great. I'm pretty damn sure I know who has the keys, too. Heading back the other way, I reached for the handle of the door to the office. This one turned, and I slowly opened it. A single flickering fluorescent bulb lit overhead. Ahead, though, I could see the sunlight streaming through another open door. The two of us moved through the dimly lit room, which I could see housed the 2 jail cells that, mercifully, appeared to be empty, and approached the open door. Taking a deep breath, I stuck just the top of my head around the corner. A pair of eyes almost level with mine nearly caused my heart to stop. I scrambled back in a panic, falling over my own legs and onto the carpeted floor. Aubrey looked terrified. What? She hissed. Not answering her, I flew back to my feet, picking up the paper cutter in my arm and raising it over my head. I was sure the affected those eyes belonged to would rush into the room at any moment. The tension in the air was so thick, you could have cut it with a knife. But nobody appeared in the doorway. After a few minutes, I lowered the blade and again moved towards the door. This time, with Aubrey literally peering over my shoulder. Together, we looked around the doorframe. "Fucking hell," she moaned out weakly as we spied who the eyes had belonged to, and turned away, sounding like she was about to throw up the candy and water we'd had earlier. It was the sheriff's deputy, Deputy Thorne. Unlike Sheriff Wake, he hadn't been a giant pain in the ass, and seemed to try and cut the kids and teenagers in town a break whenever they would get into trouble. It was thanks to him that I avoided juvie a few years ago when I'd been caught graffitiing the back of the high school as part of a dare. I'd actually liked him. Unfortunately, it had looked as though he'd been the first victim of the sheriff. His eyes were wide and glassy, his mouth wrenched open in a silent scream of horror as he sat slouched in the swivel chair behind his desk, what looked like a large hunting knife stuck out of his stomach. And it looked as though he'd been stabbed a hell of a lot. I swallowed, closing my eyes and still seeing the horrible image imprinted on the back of my eyelids. Forcing them open again, I whispered a silent prayer for the man, then looked closer. My eyes drifted down to the deputy's service belt, hoping and wishing I'd find what Yes! I softly exclaimed to myself. The deputy's pistol still sat in its holster. Taking a deep breath, I gently set the paper cutter blade down and moved over to him. I reached out, overcome with a sudden irrational fear that the very dead man would snap to life and reach out and grab my arm, but he happily never moved. Unbuttoning the holster, I slid the pistol out and checked it. It was still fully loaded. I checked the extra pockets of the belt and came up with 2 extra magazines for the gun. Now we have a much better chance of surviving this. At least for a little while longer. The sound of tires screeching snapped me out of my thoughts. It had come from outside the front of the station, beyond the double-glass doors. A hand fell across my shoulder, and I nearly had a second heart attack, spinning around to see Aubrey's panicked face inches from mine. We need to go, right now. I didn't argue. Tucking the pistol into the waistband of my jeans and picking up the blade, I followed her rapidly back through the cell room and into the filing room. Behind us, I heard the sound of screeching tires again, followed by the sound of a car door opening and slamming shut. Fuck, it's the sheriff. I quickly closed the door to the filing room shut and then fled out into the alleyway behind Aubrey, pulling that door shut as well. With it securely closed, we crouched down behind some garbage cans and waited. There was silence for a time, and then the pounding sound of footsteps came from behind the closed door. Keys jangled, and the sound of the door being unlocked could be heard. Oh hell, I know where he's going, I thought, but this was also our chance to make a break for it. Come on, we need to go while we can, I whispered to her, then moved as quickly and quietly as I could towards the final alley entrance. Beyond it, I could see the first row of houses that signaled the change from downtown to the residential district. Stopping at the corner, I risked a glance around. To the right, I could see the sheriff's Explorer parked haphazardly in front of the station. The driver's door hung wide open, and the motor still rumbled quietly in the still air. To the left, the street appeared to be deserted. I saw the body of a middle-aged woman I couldn't recognize, laying in the middle of the street. Bags of spilled groceries sprawled on the ground around her. The way ahead to the first house was clear. Okay, we're going to run across the street to that first house there, I said, pointing at the single-story ranch house. Aubrey squinted. You mean the Damones? She asked. I looked again, spying the name on the mailbox. Yeah, the Damones. We're going to try and stick to the backyards and sides of the houses, using them as cover. Your house is only another 2.5 blocks away. We don't stop for anything. We just head straight there. Sound like a plan? She looked at me, biting her lip before nodding. Yeah, a plan, she said simply. I could tell she was thinking about her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carmody were both decent, hard-working people who I liked as much as I liked Aubrey. I hoped that somehow they were still alive, but this wasn't the time to think about that. Okay, on the count of 3, we make a break for it, I said. I held up 3 fingers, then slowly lowered them, one by one. The second the last finger dropped, the two of us began sprinting across the slab of black pavement that separated us from the sanctuary of the houses. That was when someone else came sprinting around the corner to our right. My eye was drawn to the sudden explosion of movement, and I caught a glimpse of a disheveled man running towards us. For a split second my heart stopped, and my free hand reached back for the pistol in my waistband, fearing he was one of them. But then I saw the terrified expression plastered on his face and realized he was normal, like us. I also recognized him. His name was Maurice, and he'd been the town drunk for as long as I'd been alive. He was clearly sober now, though, and I saw his eyes lock on mine. I'd begun to raise my fingers to my lips to motion to him to be quiet when he began shouting at us. "Help me, please! You two, help me!" he screamed. I could see blood trailing behind him from a wound in his shoulder. The sound of his voice was like a baseball through a plate glass window in how it shattered the tension-filled silence, echoing off everything. Fuck, every one of the infected is going to hear him. I spun around to Aubrey. "Run for the Damones' house," I exclaimed. We turned and sprinted for the steps leading up to the front lawn as fast as our legs could carry us. Taking them 2 at a time, I heard Maurice scream out again behind us. "Wait, please! Don't go! Help me! Help me!" My heart wrenched in my chest at the man's pleading. I wanted so desperately to turn around and motion for him to follow us, but I knew that his voice would be attracting the attention of everyone we didn't want this way. And so, I yanked on Aubrey's arm, practically tearing her up the last few steps. Staying outside was no longer an option. We needed a place to get out of sight. I spied an open front window which led to the Damones' kitchen. The white curtains slowly billowed outside in the breeze. "Inside!" I ordered, and still hearing Maurice cry out behind us, I powered my way to the window. I turned and almost flung Aubrey through it, then hauling myself in after her. Reaching up, I pulled the window almost completely shut, but not quite. Just enough to still hear what was happening. Maurice was crying for us to come back outside and save him. Then it suddenly cut off. Feeling a knot tie itself in my stomach, I moved back to the window, setting down the blade and pulling the pistol from my waistband. Flicking off the safety, I held it in one sweaty hand and peered over the edge of the window. Maurice had stopped just before the bottom of the steps leading up to our hiding spot. He had turned around, facing back towards the other side of the street, where the sheriff now stood, half in and half out of the open door of the sheriff's office. In his hands was a long black shape. I quickly recognized it as the department's sole AR-15 rifle. My heart fluttered in my chest. Against that, the pistol in my hands was practically a damn pea-shooter. For a few moments, the scene in the street stayed frozen, as if someone had hit pause on a movie. Then I saw the crazed look on the sheriff's face intensify, his lips curling back into a snarl. Maurice let out a shrill scream and turned, beginning to run down the street towards the opposite end. For a man who drank himself into a blackout every night, he was fast, but not nearly fast enough. I saw the sheriff move quickly to the hood of his cruiser. Using the hood as a stabilizer, he aimed the rifle at the retreating man's back. Not even a second later, the stabbing sound of a gunshot rang out. I heard Maurice let out a yelp and swung my gaze back to him. He'd fallen to the ground, clutching his left leg. A small pool of blood was forming around him. I realized with a dull sense of horror that the sheriff had intentionally aimed for a wounding shot, instead of a killing one. The reason why became clear a moment later. I heard the sound of a car door slam shut, and swung my gaze back to see the cruiser fly backwards, turning to face the man. A moment later, the lights and sirens sprang to life, and I saw a look of horror flow over Maurice's face as he realized what was about to happen. I know I had a similar look on my own face. The tires squealed and the cruiser leapt forward, accelerating rapidly. I saw it close the distance to Maurice, heard him scream out, but I turned away before I could see the impact. I heard it, though. The dull thunk could be heard over the blare of the siren. I gritted my teeth, then spared a look out the window again. I truly wish I hadn't. The cruiser was reversing back over the now crumpled form of the man. I looked away again, focusing on the other end of the block. There was a group of affected rounding the corner, sprinting towards the carnage unfolding opposite them. I counted at least 20 or 30. Realizing this was our chance to study them, to see if I could figure out anything by watching them, I stayed crouched by the windowsill. I heard Aubrey whisper something behind me, but I was too focused to hear. The group appeared to be all age ranges. I saw full-grown adults as well as teenagers, as well as one or two elderly folks who dragged their walking sticks behind them. What churned my stomach, however, was seeing the kids. There were what looked like 3 or 4 of them, as young as 12, sprinting among the group and holding things like knitting needles and knives. Good Lord! Aubrey's hand fell on my shoulder, and she spoke again. Now I did focus on what she said. "What?" I whispered to her. Her eyes were sad and full of sympathy, something I didn't understand. "Eddie, turn away. Please, don't look," she said gently. I saw the look in her eyes again, and I suddenly felt as though a claw had clenched itself around my heart. She'd seen something in the group I hadn't. She'd seen... No, oh God, please no, no. I turned, hearing her tell me again not to look. But I didn't listen to her. I couldn't. I gazed back out the window at the now passing mob. They were close enough that I could see people I knew now. Michael from our graduating class. Kelly, who I'd had a crush on since freshman year of high school. Mr. Olivier, the kindly Italian man who ran the deli and gave us free sandwiches. So many others. And, almost in the middle of the pack, stood someone I knew all too well. A tall woman, her platinum blonde hair now dirty and streaked with blood. The entire front of her was streaked with blood, all of which was certainly not hers. Behind the blood-filled eyes, I could barely see the small spots of blue which remained. The lips which had once kissed me good night as a child now pulled back in an insane sneer. In her right hand was my father's hunting knife. Its blade looked almost rusted by the amount of blood covering it. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as tears threatened to pour out my eyes. "Mom?" The pack of affected, my mother among them, sprinted past the houses we hid in, flowing around the sheriff's cruiser like a stream around a rock before stopping. Realizing there was nothing left for them to attack, they turned and hurried away, looking for more targets. A moment later, the cruiser peeled out, also disappearing and leaving Maurice's crumpled and shattered body laying in the road. I turned away, sliding down onto the vinyl kitchen floor. Tears now flowed freely from my eyes, and I felt my heart shatter inside of my chest. I stayed as quiet as I could, knowing sobbing could bring the horde back our way, but I could not stop crying. I felt Aubrey slide down beside me and put her arms around me. For a moment, I attempted to pull away, then folded into her. We huddled like that for a long while. Finally, she pulled back and wiped some of the tears from my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie," she said softly. I used the sleeve of my jacket to wipe the rest away, trying to get control over myself. "I'm so sorry." I breathed in deep, letting out a choked breath as images of my mother murdering my father in an insane rage refused to stop replaying in my mind. But I knew I couldn't grieve long. We had to keep moving. I simply nodded at her, finding my voice and praying it sounded as stable as I imagined it. "The only thing that matters now is making it to our house and finding your parents." She nodded, then stood up and held out her hand to me. I reached out and took it, allowing her to pull me to my feet. I tucked the pistol back into my waistband, then picked up the paper cutter blade. "Let's go then," I said. Together, we moved quietly through the Damones. Thankfully, it seemed they'd been out of the house when everything had gone down, because it was empty. Opening the back door, we slid out into the backyard. Keeping as low a profile as we could, we began to move from house to house, heading in the direction of Aubrey's. As we darted from street to street, we passed by more bodies, showing that this side of town hadn't been saved from the slaughter. But the numbness settling in me, over seeing my mother as an affected, made me not really care. Even when we passed by a man who'd been run over by his own lawnmower, I simply stared for a moment. Eventually, we made it to Aubrey's house. That's where we are now as I type this out. When we arrived, we saw that her parents' Chevy Tahoe was not in the driveway. Aubrey said something about how they'd said they needed to go out of town sometime yesterday, but that she didn't know when they left, or if they'd come back before everything had happened. I can tell she's hoping that they're still out of town, unable to get back in. It'd be a better fate than others have, though I honestly don't know what the people blocking off the roads into town would do to people from here trying to get back in. We've decided to stay here for the night. With dark coming on fast, it's too dangerous to return to the library. And thankfully, due to Mr. and Mrs. Carmody being, well, shall we say, very affluent, they'd built the inside of their house almost like a fortress. All of the doors had steel deadbolts, which we all locked, as well as shatterproof glass. We closed all of the curtains, then gathered some food, water, and 2 sleeping bags from the Carmody's camping closet and moved into the basement, locking the door behind us. Down here, we found an old ham radio set that Mr. Carmody had as a hobby. Remembering the advice one of you gave me, I turned it on softly, but heard only dead air. I've left it on for now, just in case. I'm using this time as I type this out to charge the laptop. The carrying case had a charging cord in it. I've noticed that even less web pages seem to work now without moving to an error page. One thing I did find has me worried, if not downright afraid. A few search engines, such as Bing, still seem to work, and when I randomly decide to type in my town's name, nothing came up. No search results at all, except for ones asking if I'd meant somewhere else. That's impossible. This place even used to have its own Wikipedia article, however small. But now? It's all gone. It's as if all trace of it is being erased from the internet. Is that even possible to do? To wipe an entire town from existence, no matter how small? The radio just crackled a moment ago. I heard that same voice speak over it.
Sir, RF Ultra Phase 1 is completed. We've managed to calculate 78.5 success rate in subjects from the satellite data we've received. Over.
The deep voice answered him.
Roger that, Deacons. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 will commence tomorrow at 1400 hours. The project will last no longer than 59 hours longer. Is that clear?
The voice answered.
Roger that, sir. When can we expect our house scientists to arrive for analysis gathering and briefing? You'll be receiving them tomorrow at 0800 hours, Sergeant. Until then, continue monitoring all exits, as well as all radio channels. If anyone approaches, affected or not, you are authorized to use lethal force. Over and out. Over and out.
And with that, the radio died again. I can barely begin to make sense of this. I still feel numb from, I can't bring myself to say it again. What I saw. This is so beyond fucked up that it's not funny. We're toys, specimens in some government or group's fucking science experiment. People I knew and loved are dead just because someone wanted to test some likely highly illegal out. Just what the hell, dude? And what the hell are they even making a fucking weapon like this for anyways? What sadistic purpose could something like this possibly have? I don't know. I feel exhausted, mentally and emotionally. I've just been staring at the huge map of town thumbtacked to the board behind the radio for the last half an hour. There are 3 ways out of town. The main road leading in and out, a dirt access road which leads off to the east that's only used by the power company and off-roaders, and the ski lifts and trails that lead up into the mountains. There's a mark, though, halfway up. It looks like an old mine shaft buried in the side of the mountain. Maybe there's something I can use there. But for now, I can't think anymore. I need to try and sleep. Even though I know I'll suffer nightmares after what I've seen today, I need to rest. I can hear Aubrey shifting in her sleeping bag, already asleep. You guys helped us today. You guys helped us stay alive with the things you said. Please, if you can think of anything more, any advice or information, please tell me. Because right now, Aubrey and I really need it. I'll check in the morning and hopefully update you tomorrow about what happens. We need to try and find a way out of here before we end up like Maurice and the others.